Welcome back to the Content Area Instructional Strategies workshop from Southern Utah University. In this video, we want to focus on the idea of metacognition. So our goals here is to be able to define metacognition in relation to both language learning and content learning, and then be able to use at least one metacognitive strategy that will help students reflect on their learning and improve their learning processes. So over the course of our workshop, we have revisited this framework many times because our goal is to understand that in order for someone to develop language proficiency and be able to communicate in the content area that we teach, we can't just directly teach the language, but at the same time, we can't just give them tasks and hope that they'll pick up the language. We need to have this nice balance of these four different quadrants where we are explicitly teaching the language that students need. We're giving them lots of opportunities for input and output, and then we're building their fluency by having them repeat at level, fairly easy tasks to build their automaticity. So they're becoming more independent and more proficient with the kinds of language that they need in our content area. Now, on top of all of this, we want to remember the concept of metacognition. Metacognition can play a role in all four of these strands. And the more we can incorporate metacognition into our courses, the more students will develop more independent learning strategies that will help them beyond just our individual course throughout their life as a lifelong learner. So let's take a moment to really understand and explain what we mean by the term metacognition. So if we were to break metacognition, use a vocabulary strategy to break it into word parts, we have meta, which can mean beyond or about. We have the root, which can mean to learn or think. And then we have the shun part, which turns this into a noun. It serves a grammatical function. So what perhaps the best way to think about metacognition is that it is the process of thinking about one's own thinking or learning processes. So instead of just doing, instead of just learning, we stop, we reflect, we think about it, what's going well, where can we make improvements? Are the strategies and approaches that I'm using helping me to accomplish my goals? It may even involve what are my goals and tracking those goals and thinking about them. So metacognition is all of this. And this is often a feature that distinguishes an okay or struggling learner from a really successful learner. A really successful learner is one that tends to use metacognitive strategies. So the more that we can integrate that into our classrooms and model it for our students, the more likely our students will be to develop metacognitive processes that help them become better thinkers and learners. We also see the word metacognitive, metacognition as the noun, metacognitive as the adjective, or metacognitively possibly as the adverb. Those are the most common word forms we'll see it. So metacognition is important as part of this content and language learning process because it helps students reflect on their learning. It can help them to set goals for future learning and to evaluate their use of strategies that are helping them learn, and then maybe revise those goals or revise their strategies so that they are more successful in where they really want to go and what they need to do to get there. So let's talk about some strategies that teachers can use to encourage metacognition in their classroom. One of them is the idea of preflections. So you probably thought a lot about reflections, having students reflect on an experience, what went well, what would they change, what would they do differently. A preflection is just something you do before. So you get students to think about what will they do with this topic, what do they want to know, and it sort of gets their brain organized and focused on the topic. It starts to get them making some predictions and thinking about how is this new information related to information they already had. And one of the great things about this is that it makes learners feel involved in the topic from the start, that they're already starting to evaluate the information and compare it with their existing understanding. Another one is goal setting. We talked about this quite a bit. It's a very common task in metacognition, but to get learners to think about what are the outcomes that they want to learn about? What are they most interested in? Now, often we teach with a prescribed curriculum, And so there are outcomes that we'll all have to accomplish in the class in order to meet the course goals. But if we can reveal to those students, here's the outcomes, here's the goals that we have, which of these interest you the most? We could also then take this into a self-assessment. Which of these outcomes can you already do? Which of these outcomes are you going to need help with? And so this helps learners frame the learning in their mind, and they can start thinking about, okay, I already know this, so what I really need to do is spend a lot of my practice on these other things that I don't know how to do as well. And so this helps the learners take a little more control of their learning and feel a little more responsible for their learning, so that the teacher isn't the only one responsible for the learning. It puts that responsibility on the students as well, and trains them to start setting these goals and self-evaluating so that they become more independent. Another strategy is to encourage feedback in the classroom. And not just feedback on, do you understand the content? Do you have the language? But how do you feel about this experience? What's going well for you? What are you frustrated about? What are you excited about? Where do you feel confident? Where do you have concerns? That emotional feedback is just as important as the content and the language feedback. If we can develop an environment where students feel valued and heard and recognized, it can make a big difference in their ability to participate in the class. When I have started using feedback in my university level courses with students, I used to do it maybe at the midterm and at the end of the semester, but I started doing it after the first major assignment, so about week 2 or 3 of a course. And I've noticed it makes a huge difference in the atmosphere and the rapport in the classroom. Students feel like I actually care about them, and I'm not just there to grade their assignments, that I care about how they're feeling, I care about which assignments they like, and that I am using an approach that will help them. And so that feedback helps not just with making sure the course goals are accomplished, but making sure that students feel like they're cared about. Another great thing you can do in the classroom is talk about different strategies. So if you have an assignment, there may be multiple ways that assignment could be accomplished. So asking students, well, what did you do to accomplish the assignment? What tools did you use or instruments? Did you use some digital devices? Did you visit websites to help you? Did you use books to help you? Sometimes I will use what's called a think aloud. And a think aloud is you give a sample task to a student who is willing to demonstrate in front of the others, and ask them as they complete the task to think aloud their thought processes. And you might need to model it a few times yourself, but by having students do think alouds, it reveals to you what students are thinking as they do a task. But also, if it's a student who has some really good strategies, then they're modeling that for other students, and they can give other students ideas about, oh, I've been doing it this way, but my classmate does it a different way, and that seems to work for them. Maybe I should give it a try. So discussing different strategies can help students have more ideas about how they could accomplish tasks. And maybe the way that they're doing it right now isn't the most effective. So learning those new strategies can give them more options. Another discussion you could have is about the rubric. Many of us use rubrics in our courses, especially if we have some kind of productive language assignment where students have to maybe write a report or give a presentation. In the past, I have always used a rubric that I think is pretty good for an assignment. And sometimes I will explain to students, here's what the rubric is. These are the things you should pay attention to. But I've also tried in some courses, before I reveal the rubric to students, I ask students, what do you think matters? What is the criteria that we should pay attention to, that students should be focusing on? What are the things that you think I should be looking at when I grade your assignment? And this sparks really good discussions for students because it helps reveal the things that they care about, and it can help align it with the things that I, as the teacher and the evaluator, care about. And what I often find is that there's a lot of alignment between what I value and what the students value. But instead of just me giving it to them and imposing it on them, if I let them come up with those ideas, they feel more ownership over it. They recognize better that these things do matter. And so I often value things like content, organization, language use, and presentation, meaning do they have their formatting and editing Does it look professional? But when I ask students what they care about, they usually come up with the same kinds of things. They might use different words, but just that discussion of what matters is really helpful in the classroom because it helps students take ownership of the criteria instead of just receiving it from the teacher. And ultimately, that's one of the main things about metacognition that we want to devote some class time to it. It takes extra time to do metacognitive activities, but it helps develop learners in our classroom who are more aware of their learning processes, their learning goals, and are better equipped to become independent learners in the future. Now, of course, metacognition can be challenging if we try to do it in a language that the students are not fluent in. So whenever possible, I do metacognitive activities in the language that students are most comfortable with. Metacognition is also easier with older students than younger students. But even younger students can tell you how they feel about something. They can tell you what they think works and doesn't work. They can talk about and recognize that there are different strategies to do the same thing. And so you need to find a level of metacognitive discussion that's appropriate for your learners. And you may want to do it in their native language rather than the language that they're learning in the classroom. But whatever approach you take, the more you can integrate metacognition into your classroom, the more likely your students are to become more independent, more confident, and more equipped learners to manage their own learning processes.